Ancient builders moved mountains of stone without any modern machinery. This is the core mystery of megalithic construction, a puzzle that reshapes our view of prehistoric engineering. By the end of this exploration, you will understand the ingenious methods that allowed 20 specific colossal stones to be moved and placed using only human ingenuity. How did cultures separated by oceans and millennia solve the same impossible problem? What does their shared determination tell us about our own potential? What forgotten chapter of human collaboration is written in these silent stones? 45 tons is not just a number, it is the weight of a fully loaded city bus, a mass of solid rock that seems to belong to the earth itself. The term megalith does little to convey the physical reality of these stones. To stand before one is to feel a profound shift in scale, a humbling reminder of what human hands, working in concert over generations, can achieve. The stones on our list are not merely large, they are deliberate, chosen for their specific qualities, shaped with intent, and moved with a purpose that has echoed across centuries. Their journey often began in a quarry miles away, a place selected for the quality of its rock. From there, the challenge was twofold. First, to detach a precise block weighing 20, 30, or even 50 tons from the living bedrock. Then, to guide that irreplaceable cargo across valleys, rivers, and hills to a site chosen with celestial or spiritual precision. This was done without wheels, without metal tools harder than bronze or stone, and without the pulling power of domesticated animals like oxen or horses, which were absent in many of these cultures. What remains is a silent testament. There are no instruction manuals, no foreman's diaries from the Stone Age. The builders left their story not in words but in the stones themselves. Scratches from stone mauls, grooves worn by ropes, even the subtle compaction of soil beneath a dragged weight, these are the cryptic clues. Modern researchers must read this physical language, conducting experiments by recreating ancient techniques to see what actually works. This process of reverse engineering genius forces us to ask not just how they moved the stone, but why they went to such extraordinary lengths. The answer lies in the meaning imbued in the first of our 20 examples, a stone whose journey captures the essence of this ancient endeavor. The journey for the first stone began 20 miles from where it now stands. On the windswept Marlborough Downs, Neolithic builders selected a specific Sarsen stone, a dense sandstone block that would become part of Stonehenge's inner horseshoe. This was not a random choice. These stones, some weighing as much as 50 tons, were prized for their durability and striking pale color against the green plain. Their destination was a site already centuries old, a place of gathering and celestial observation on Salisbury Plain. Between the quarry and the sacred circle lay a rolling landscape of forests, valleys, and rivers. The builders had no wheels, no metal cables, and no beasts of burden to assist them. Their tools were made of stone, wood, and bone. Their greatest asset was collective human determination. The prevailing theory of their method is a masterpiece of simple physics. They likely constructed a robust wooden sledge beneath the stone. To move this sledge, they may have laid down a trackway of halved logs, creating a smooth, continuous surface. On this wooden road, they could have applied animal fat or water as a lubricant, dramatically reducing friction. Then, with ropes woven from plant fibers or strips of leather, teams of hundreds would have taken up the strain. Coordination was everything. It is easy to imagine rhythmic chants or drumbeats unifying their pulls, turning a chaotic tug of war into a steady, incremental procession. This was not a sprint but a pilgrimage, advancing the stone a few hundred feet each day. Recent experiments have tested this idea. Researchers from University College London successfully moved a 1-ton concrete block using a replica wooden sledge on a track of greased timbers, powered by just a dozen people. Scaling this concept up, they calculated that moving a 50-ton sarsen would require a crew of around 200, but moving the stone was only half the battle. Once at the site, the builders faced an even more delicate task. How do you lift a 50-ton pillar into a perfectly vertical position, and then somehow hoist another equally massive lintel stone to balance precisely on top? The answer lies in Neolithic ingenuity. They likely dug a large, sloping pit adjacent to the stone's final resting place. Using wooden rollers, they guided the stone to the pit's edge, letting its own weight help tip it inward. Then, with a system of levers, ropes, and frames, they would have painstakingly raised it upright, packing the pit with rubble and timber to hold it in place. To set the lintel, they probably built an enormous earthen ramp, dragging the crosspiece up the slope and carefully lowering it onto the waiting pillars. This entire process, from quarry to final placement, represents a breathtaking understanding of balance, leverage, and mass. It was engineering in its purest form, achieved through observation, trial, and a shared vision that compelled a community to move mountains, one slow, deliberate step at a time. The silent plains of Salisbury are one thing, but the vast, open ocean presents a challenge of an entirely different scale. Far out in the Pacific, over 2,000 miles from the nearest continent, lies the most isolated inhabited island on Earth. Here, on a speck of land called Rapa Nui, the Polynesian settlers faced a profound test of ingenuity. With nothing but the resources the island itself provided, they embarked on a project of staggering ambition, carving and moving the monolithic Moai statues. These are not mere stones, but ancestors given form, their stern gazes turned inland to watch over their living descendants. The journey of the second stone on our list is a story of human resilience in the face of extreme isolation. The Moai were born in the volcanic crater of Rapa, a landscape still littered with statues in every stage of creation. Here, the largest of them all, an unfinished colossus known as El Gigante, still lies attached to the bedrock. It is a staggering 270 tons of volcanic tuff, a silent testament to a vision that perhaps outstripped even their formidable capabilities. The completed statues that did make the journey are no less impressive, averaging 14 tons each. Their destination was the coastal platforms, the Ahu, which could be up to 11 miles away across rugged, uneven terrain. So how did they manage it on an island with no large trees for rollers and no draft animals? For decades, the dominant image was of statues being dragged horizontally on log sledges, a theory that led to narratives of ecological collapse from deforestation. But more recent research, led by archaeologists like Terry Hunt, points to a far more elegant and culturally resonant solution. The island's own oral traditions spoke of the Moai walking to their platforms. Hunt and his team took this literally, conducting experiments with precise scale replicas. They found that by using 3 strong ropes, one on each side to rock the statue and one behind to control the forward tilt, a surprisingly small team could make a multi-ton Moai pivot and walk in a controlled, upright fashion. This method, requiring coordination and rhythm rather than brute force alone, aligns beautifully with the living memory of the people. It transforms the transport from a grueling drag into a ceremonial procession, a stately dance where the ancestor is guided to its final resting place. Alternative ideas, like sliding the statues on a path lubricated with mashed sweet potato, also have merit and may have been used in combination. What remains undeniable is the achievement itself. In utter isolation, with a population that likely never exceeded a few thousand, the people of Rapa Nui moved mountains of stone to honor their past and define their world. They did not just move statues, they made them walk, proving that the most powerful engine for moving megaliths was not timber or rope, but a unified cultural will. From the open ocean, we turn to the sweltering jungles of the Gulf Coast. Here, in the fertile lowlands of what is now Mexico, the Olmec civilization laid the foundations for Mesoamerican culture. Among their most enduring legacies are the colossal stone heads, brooding sentinels carved from single blocks of volcanic basalt. The third stone on our list is one of these monumental portraits, a testament to power carved in stone and moved against formidable odds. These heads are not abstract symbols. Each one is a distinct individual with unique facial features, headgear, and expressions ranging from serene authority to solemn determination. Most scholars believe they portray powerful Olmec rulers, transforming a leader's likeness into a permanent, immovable assertion of their reign. The stone for these giants came from the Tuxtla Mountains, a source of dense, fine-grained basalt perfect for detailed carving. But the quarries were not conveniently located. They sat over 60 miles away from the major Olmec centers like San Lorenzo and La Venta. Between the mountains and the ceremonial plazas lay a challenging landscape of dense tropical forest, seasonal swamps, and meandering rivers. The Olmec, like the builders of Stonehenge and Rapa Nui, had no wheels and no domesticated animals suitable for heavy labor. The horse and the ox would not arrive in the Americas for millennia. So how did they transport a 20-ton block of stone through 60 miles of such terrain? The answer reveals a brilliant adaptation to their environment. Archaeologists studying the region believe the Olmec became masters of logistical timing, turning the elements to their advantage. During the rainy season, the rivers and swells would flood, creating natural waterways where none existed in the dry months. It is likely they quarried the stones strategically, then waited for the rains. They could have moved the massive basalt blocks to the nearest riverbank using a combination of wooden rollers and rope-dragging techniques. Once at the water's edge, the real ingenuity began. They may have constructed large rafts from buoyant balsa wood, carefully rolling the stone onto this floating platform. Then, using the current and perhaps teams of people in canoes to guide and pull, they could have floated the colossal head downstream for a significant portion of its journey. This use of water transport would have dramatically reduced the friction and physical effort required compared to an entirely overland haul. For the final leg, from the riverbank to the heart of the city, they would have returned to land-based methods, likely using a sledge on a prepared causeway of logs or smoothed earth. The coordination required for this multi-stage operation speaks volumes about Olmec society. To quarry, float, and position these stones required more than just muscle. It demanded planners, engineers, boat builders, and food producers to sustain a large, specialized workforce. This level of organization points to a highly stratified society, one where a ruling class could mobilize hundreds, perhaps thousands, of people for a communal project that served to solidify their own divine or political authority. The stone head, therefore, was more than a portrait. Its very journey from a distant mountain to the center of civic life was a public demonstration of control over both nature and people. The Olmec did not conquer their landscape to move the stone. They collaborated with it, reading the rhythms of the seasons and the flow of the rivers to achieve what seemed impossible. They turned the swamp from an obstacle into a highway, proving once again that the most profound ancient engineering often lies in understanding and harnessing the world exactly as it is. 800 tons is a weight that borders on the incomprehensible. It is the mass of 2 fully loaded jumbo jets, or a small apartment building carved from a single piece of solid limestone. In the shadow of the Roman temples at Baalbek in modern-day Lebanon rests the 4th stone on our list, a foundation block of the so-called Trilithon. This is not merely a large stone, it is a statement in rock, a declaration of power so vast it challenges our fundamental understanding of ancient capability. While the magnificent Corinthian columns and intricate carvings above are Roman masterpieces, The three gargantuan foundation stones upon which they partly rest are something else entirely. Their sheer size, their perfect fit, and the mystery of their origin point to a much older, possibly Phoenician, civilization that mastered megalithic engineering long before Rome's legions marched. The quarry for these behemoths sits less than a mile from the temple complex, a short distance that only deepens the mystery. How do you move a block the size of a small house over uneven ground with no cranes, no steel, and no internal combustion engines? Mainstream archaeology paints a picture of staggering, coordinated human effort. The process likely began with absolute precision. Using water, sand, and copper saws, workers would have painstakingly undercut the block, freeing it from the bedrock. Then they would have constructed a roadway of fitted stones, graded to be as level as possible, leading directly to the building site. Onto this road, they may have placed a colossal wooden sledge beneath the stone. To reduce the immense friction, the track could have been lubricated with a slurry of wet clay or olive oil. The pulling force would have been astronomical. Some estimates suggest it would require the coordinated strength of several thousand people, all pulling on hemp ropes thicker than a man's arm. To manage such a crowd, engineers might have used capstans, large rotating winches set along the route. Teams would push on the arms of these winches, winding the rope and inching the sledge forward in a controlled, incremental crawl. The sound alone would have been overwhelming, a symphony of creaking wood, grinding stone, and the unified shouts of a mobilized society. This was not a construction project, it was a societal undertaking, a display of organizational power meant to inspire awe and demonstrate absolute control over both people and material. Of course, such an immense puzzle invites more speculative ideas. Some have wondered if the builders possessed a lost technology, perhaps using sound frequencies or harmonic resonance to somehow make the stone lighter, an idea that lives in the realm of legend rather than evidence. While these fringe theories capture the imagination, the more profound truth may be even more impressive. The likely reality is that these stones were moved through a breathtaking combination of simple physics, meticulous planning, and raw human labor on an almost unimaginable scale. The Trilithon does not whisper of forgotten magic, it shouts of forgotten ambition. It stands as proof that when a culture's vision is grand enough, it can move the very earth one agonizing, triumphant inch at a time. Granite is a stone of stubborn permanence, and the ancient Egyptians chose it for their most audacious declarations. The fifth stone on our list is not one that stands, but one that never left its birthplace, the unfinished obelisk of Aswan. Lying in its granite quarry, this partially carved giant stretches 137 feet long and weighs an estimated 1,200 tons. Had it been completed, it would have been the single heaviest piece of stone ever shaped by humankind. Its very incompleteness is a gift to history, for it shows us the clear tool marks, the trenches cut around its form, and the stark reality of the ambition that defined a civilization. This was the pinnacle of stone-moving intent, a process repeated for the dozens of other obelisks that did complete their journey. These were not just monuments, they were needles of stone meant to pierce the sky, connecting the earth to the sun god Ra himself. Their transport was a logistical symphony performed on the stage of the Nile. The process began in quarries like Aswan, where workers used balls of dolerite, a stone harder than granite, to pound out trenches around the chosen block. Once freed, the real test began. Tomb paintings from the New Kingdom show us the method. The obelisk was placed on a massive wooden sledge. Then, teams of laborers poured water onto the sand in front of the sledge path. The dampened sand created a firm, cohesive surface that prevented the sledge runners from digging in, dramatically reducing the friction. A pharaoh's overseer might stand atop the stone itself, directing the rhythmic pull of hundreds of men as they dragged their god-king's statement toward the river. The Nile was their highway. During the annual inundation, when the floodwaters swelled, engineers would guide the sledge directly into a specially built canal where a colossal barge awaited. This barge was a feat of naval engineering in its own right, constructed with a central trench to cradle the obelisk and stabilized to prevent a catastrophic roll. Towed by fleets of smaller boats and using the current to their advantage, the Egyptians floated their stone mountain northward to temples like Carnac or Luxor. The final act, the erection, was a masterpiece of controlled descent. At the temple site, they constructed a high earthen ramp leading to a deep, sand-filled pit. The obelisk was dragged up the ramp, positioned precisely over the pit, and its base was carefully guided into place. Then, in a moment of breathtaking patience, workers slowly emptied the sand from the pit. Grain by grain, the obelisk sank into its vertical position, settling into place with the help of guiding ropes. There was no sudden drop, no crashing impact, only a gradual, ceremonial descent from the human realm to its permanent home. This entire process, from quarry to raising, reveals no secret force or lost technology. It reveals something perhaps more profound, a civilization that mastered the systematic application of observation. They understood the properties of wet sand. They harnessed the predictable rhythm of their river. They organized labor on a scale that could only be sustained by a deeply centralized and confident society. The obelisk's journey was a hymn to planning, a proof that moving mountains of stone required not a magic word, but 1,000 perfectly executed steps. But what happens when the goal is not to move a stone, but to move it perfectly? In the humid river valleys of Costa Rica's Diquis Delta, the sixth stone on our list presents a puzzle of a different shape entirely. Here, scattered as if by a giant's hand, lie hundreds of stone spheres, some as small as a baseball, others towering over 2 meters tall and weighing 16 tons. Their surfaces are uncannily smooth, their roundness so precise it seems to defy the simple stone tools that created them. Carved from hard gabbro, limestone, or sandstone between 300 years before the Common Era and 1500 after, these orbs were not dragged, they were guided. Their journey asks a new question of our ancient builders. How do you transport a perfect sphere? The first challenge was creation itself. Archaeologists believe the sculptors likely selected large boulders from riverbeds or quarries, then used smaller stones of the same hardness to peck and grind them into shape. They may have employed heat, repeatedly heating the stone with fire, and then rapidly cooling it with water to cause controlled flaking. To achieve such symmetry without modern measuring tools, they might have used a simple but effective method, suspending the sphere from a cord and marking the points that touched the ground, slowly grinding away the high spots until no single point touched more than any other. This was geometry performed through patience and acute observation. Once a sphere was born, it had to be moved, often through dense, muddy jungle to riverbanks or cleared plazas. The most logical method aligns beautifully with the object's form. Teams could have constructed a wooden cradle or a frame of logs around the sphere, then used levers to rock it forward onto a continuously rolling track of logs. In essence, they would have turned the sphere into its own roller, a self-contained system of motion. For longer journeys, especially those involving the many rivers of the delta, water transport was almost certainly key. Using ropes and ramps, they could have maneuvered a sphere onto a raft, floating it calmly downstream to its destination with far less effort than an overland haul. The purpose of these spheres remains one of archaeology's gentle debates. They were not tools, nor were they weapons. Their placement near important dwellings, in alignments along pathways, or in groups suggests a social and celestial meaning. They may have marked territories of powerful chiefs, their size and number reflecting a family's status and influence. Some groupings appear to align with solstice sunrises or other astronomical events, turning the landscape into a quiet observatory. Their perfect shape might have symbolized the cosmos, the sun, or the concept of wholeness and unity. To move a 16-ton sphere through the jungle was to make an idea tangible, to bring a symbol of cosmic order into the human realm. It required a community working in harmony, not just to haul weight but to preserve perfection. Each careful rotation, each gentle nudge onto a waiting raft was an act of reverence for the form itself. The spheres of Costa Rica remind us that ancient engineering was not solely about overcoming mass, but sometimes about honoring form, moving not just stone but meaning with a delicate and precise balance. The very idea of monument building has a timeline, and for generations we believed it began with the plow. Settled farming, the theory went, created surplus food, which in turn allowed for specialized labor, leading to the grand projects of civilization. Then, in the 1990s, on a windswept hill in southeastern Turkey, archaeologists unearthed a truth that turned that timeline to dust. The seventh stone on our list is not a single block, but an entire forest of them, the towering T-shaped pillars of Göbekli Tepe. Carved from limestone and weighing up to 20 tons, these megaliths were erected around 9,600 years before the Common Era. That is over 6,000 years older than Stonehenge. And the people who built it were not farmers living in cities. They were hunter-gatherers, communities who followed the herds and gathered wild grains. This discovery shatters a foundational assumption of human history. Monumental architecture did not emerge from agricultural surplus. It appears the human drive to build meaning from stone may have been the very spark that ignited the shift toward settled life itself. The pillars were quarried from the limestone bedrock of the surrounding plateau, a relatively soft stone that could be worked with flint tools. The quarry was only a few hundred meters from the hilltop site, a short distance that belies an immense challenge. Moving a 20-ton pillar, even a few hundred meters over rolling terrain, without wheels or draft animals, required a brilliant social calculus. The most likely method involved a now familiar toolkit of ingenuity. They probably carved the pillar directly from the bedrock, undercutting it and using wooden levers to free it. Then they would have constructed a robust wooden sledge, placing the pillar atop it. To move this colossal load, they may have laid down a track of logs, creating a temporary road. With ropes made from plant fibers or animal hide, large teams could then pull the sledge in a slow, coordinated crawl up the slope to the sacred hill. But the true wonder of Göbekli Tepe is not the how but the who and the why. This was not the work of a permanent, year-round labor force. The people who built it were nomadic, moving with the seasons. This implies that the construction was a seasonal event, a gathering. Different clans or groups spread across the region would have converged on this hill at appointed times, perhaps during periods of abundance. They came together not to build a city, but to build a temple. The coordination required for this is staggering. It means these early societies possessed a sophisticated level of social organization and a shared belief system powerful enough to transcend daily survival. They agreed on a common architectural language, the mysterious T-shaped pillars often adorned with carvings of animals, from foxes and snakes to birds and lions. They agreed on a plan and they pooled their labor to execute it over generations. The monument itself became the reason for the gathering, and the gathering reinforced the community's shared identity. In this light, moving the stones was not a logistical burden. It was the ritual. The act of hauling a pillar together, of raising it into its socket, was a physical prayer, a collective action that bound the community tighter than any law. Göbekli Tepe suggests that before we built granaries to store grain, we built temples to store meaning. The impulse to create something larger than ourselves, to shape our world in the image of our beliefs, might be one of the most fundamental drivers of human collaboration. It was not agriculture that made us builders, but perhaps building that made us into the societies that would eventually learn to farm. The sheer number of stones at Carnac is enough to stop you in your tracks. The eighth site on our list is not a single megalith, but an army of them, thousands of granite menhirs marching across the Breton landscape in eerie, parallel rows that stretch for kilometers. This is engineering as an act of repetition, a statement made not with one colossal block but with a relentless, ordered multitude. Transporting a single 350-ton stone is a feat, but moving thousands of them, some from outcrops several kilometers away, and placing them with such geometric intent, speaks of a society with a vision that spanned generations. The builders of Carnac worked between 4,500 and 3,300 years before the Common Era, a time of deep connection to the cycles of land and sky. The local granite was their medium, and their canvas was the earth itself. To move these stones, they likely turned the seasons into their allies. One compelling theory suggests that the major transport work was conducted in winter. During the cold months, the damp Breton ground would freeze, creating a naturally hard, slippery surface of frost or even ice. Dragging a massive stone on a wooden sledge across frozen earth would have significantly reduced the grinding friction that made summer transport so arduous. They may have also constructed sophisticated wooden trackways, perhaps even a form of early rail system using grooved wooden planks to guide the sledges in a straight, efficient path toward the alignment sites. This was not haphazard hauling, it was a calibrated process. The scale of the operation implies a staggering level of social cohesion. To feed, house, and coordinate the large crews needed for such a project, year after year, generation after generation, required a stable and highly organized community. But Carnac's mystery deepens when we ask why. Why expend such colossal effort to create these vast fields of stones? The alignments are not an enclosure or a temple in the traditional sense. They are a deliberate arrangement on the landscape, with many rows precisely oriented to the rising and setting sun at the solstices. This suggests the act of moving and erecting each stone was itself a ritual, a physical prayer woven into the annual cycle. Each stone placed was a marker of time, a participant in a celestial ceremony. The long, parallel rows may have served as processional pathways, guiding people through a sacred geometry during seasonal gatherings. In this light, the immense labor was not separate from the site's spiritual purpose. It was the very essence of it. The months of planning, the coordinated pull of the teams on a frosty morning, the final levering of the stone into its socket, these were all acts of communal devotion, stitching the community's effort directly into the fabric of the land. Carnac does not just represent a society that could move mountains of stone. It reveals a society that moved them in concert with the heavens, turning engineering into a form of worship and the landscape into a permanent, silent hymn. Even after the Moai had walked to their platforms, the work was not finished. The 9th stone on our list is not a statue, but a crown, the massive red Pukao that adorned the heads of the most important Moai. Quarried from a separate site called Pukao, these cylindrical stones of volcanic scoria could weigh up to 12 tons. Their vibrant red color was a deliberate and powerful choice, setting the completed figures apart in the landscape. But the challenge they represent is almost more baffling than moving the statues themselves. How do you transport a 12-ton cylinder and then, with no modern machinery, lift it precisely onto the head of a statue that may already stand over 30 feet tall? The journey of the Pukao began at Pukao, a crater of distinctive red stone located several miles from the coastal Ahu. Transporting these cylinders likely used their very shape to advantage. Researchers like Carl Lipo have suggested they could have been rolled along prepared roads, a method that turns the object's form into an asset rather than a burden. Imagine teams carefully guiding a giant stone drum, using levers and ropes to keep it on course, its own roundness allowing it to cover distance with a relatively efficient, rocking motion. But arrival at the statue's base presented the ultimate puzzle. The prevailing theory is one of elegant, incremental construction. The Rapa Nui engineers may have built a large earthen ramp directly against the front of the erected Moai, piling stones and soil into a steep, temporary hill that reached higher than the statue's head. Using this ramp, workers could have dragged the Pukao up the slope, perhaps on a sledge or by rolling it, until it was positioned directly above the Moai's head. Then, with painstaking care, they would have used ropes and wooden levers to slide the cylinder off the ramp and lower it into place, a millimeter at a time, ensuring its hollowed-out base settled securely onto the statue's flat pate. This operation required an intuitive, yet profound, grasp of physics. They had to manage the center of gravity of both the Pukao and the entire statue during the delicate placement, understanding how to balance forces to prevent a catastrophic topple. It was a high-stakes game of leverage played with multi-ton pieces. The Pukao was far more than a decorative hat. In Polynesian culture, the head is the most sacred part of the body, the seat of mana or spiritual power. The addition of the red stone cylinder was the final act of consecration, a visual amplification of the ancestors' presence and authority. The engineering prowess it demonstrates is breathtaking, but it also deepens the cultural meaning. This was not an afterthought, it was the essential finishing touch, a testament to a people who refused to see any challenge as insurmountable. They moved mountains to carve their ancestors, guided them across the island, and then, with calm precision, placed a mountain upon their heads. The sea was not just a path for the Vikings, it was their world. On the island of Gotland, a strategic hub in the Baltic, this maritime identity found eternal expression in stone. The 10th site on our list is not a single monolith, but a fleet of them, the ancient stone ships. These are not carved sculptures, but careful arrangements of large glacial boulders placed between 500 and 1,000 years after the Common Era to outline the elegant, elongated form of a Viking ship. While no single stone here rivals the weight of an Egyptian obelisk, the collective effort reveals a different kind of ambition, one focused on perfect geometry and symbolic meaning. The landscape itself provided the raw material. As the glaciers of the last ice age retreated, they left behind a scattered legacy of granite and limestone boulders dotting the fields and forests. The Viking builders did not need to quarry, they needed to curate, selecting stones of appropriate size and shape from the surrounding area. Moving them, however, still demanded the timeless toolkit. Using wooden sledges, rollers, and stout levers, teams would have repositioned these multi-ton stones, sometimes over distances of several hundred meters, to their sacred sites. They dug shallow trenches to set the stones on their edges, creating a continuous, unbroken hull and prow that gleamed against the green earth. This was a community effort, likely carried out by the kin group of the individual being honored, a physical act of remembrance that bound the living to the memory of the departed. The ship shape is the profound clue. In Norse belief, a vessel was not merely transportation, it was a conduit between worlds. A chieftain or a revered warrior would be laid to rest within the stone outline, often with grave goods, as if prepared for a final voyage. The stone ship did not sail on water, it sailed on the landscape itself, a permanent vessel meant to carry its occupant to the afterlife. This practice shows a powerful continuity of human ingenuity. 1,000 years after the pyramids, and even as metal tools and advanced sailing technology defined their daily lives, these Norse communities instinctively returned to the most fundamental methods of megalithic movement. They used levers, ropes, and collective will to solve a problem of weight and placement, not for a temple to a distant god, but for a personal monument to a life lived. The stone ships of Gotland are a quiet testament. They remind us that the drive to shape the land with massive stones, to leave a mark that says we were here and this person mattered, transcends any single era or technology. It is a human impulse, one that surfaces wherever a community seeks to anchor memory to the earth, using the oldest tools of all, simple physics and shared purpose. The shift from sacred geometry to military necessity reveals another powerful engine behind megalithic ambition. In the rugged highlands of Greece, the 11th stone on our list served as both a roof and a warning. The colossal limestone lintel above the Lion Gate of Mycenaean weighs an estimated 20 tons, a horizontal giant that has guarded the entrance to the citadel since around 1,250 years before the Common Era. This was not a monument to an ancestor or a celestial event. It was a statement of impregnable power, a first line of defense carved in stone. The gate's construction is a masterclass in applied engineering under pressure. The massive doorjambs, themselves monolithic stones, were set vertically into deep sockets, but placing the lintel across this formidable gap high above the ground presented a classic problem of height and weight. Mycenaean engineers almost certainly turned to one of the oldest and most reliable methods in the builder's repertoire, the earthen ramp. They would have piled a mountain of soil, rubble, and timber behind the nearly completed wall, creating a solid, sloping roadway that rose to meet the very top of the doorjambs. Along this temporary incline, teams of laborers, using ropes and possibly wooden rollers, would have dragged the 20-ton lintel stone upward in a slow, controlled ascent. Every pull had to be measured, every movement coordinated, to prevent the stone from sliding sideways or cracking under its own immense weight. The most delicate moment came after placement. With the lintel finally seated across the gap, resting securely on the jambs, the workers faced a paradoxical task. They had to dismantle the very structure that made the construction possible. Carefully, they would have removed the earthen ramp from behind the wall, leaving the gate standing alone and triumphant. This operation required not just brute force but foresight. They had to calculate the angle of the ramp, the distribution of weight during the drag, and the behavior of the stone as the supporting earth was withdrawn, ensuring the entire structure settled into a permanent, stable equilibrium. The iconic lion sculpture carved in relief on the lintel was the final touch, a symbol of royal strength watching over the kingdom. This gate was more than an entrance, it was a psychological fortress. The sheer scale of the stones communicated an undeniable message to any approaching visitor or potential adversary. The rulers within could command the very landscape to their will. They could move mountains to protect their wealth and people. In this context, the act of moving the lintel was a direct investment in survival and dominance. It demonstrates how the drive to secure, to defend, and to deter can be just as potent a motivator for monumental achievement as the drive to worship or commemorate. The Lion Gate stands today not merely because of the quality of its limestone, but because of the quality of the planning that raised it, a testament to the fact that some of humanity's greatest physical feats were born not from peace, but from the relentless desire to ensure it. High in the Caucasus Mountains, where the air grows thin and eagles circle, another testament to this universal human impulse stands silent. The 12th stone on our list is not a single monument, but a landscape of memory, the countless dolmens of Russia and Georgia. Built over 4,000 years ago during the Bronze Age, these structures are deceptively simple, a massive stone slab balanced like a tabletop upon upright supporting stones. Yet the capstones alone often weigh between 10 and 20 tons, and they were not placed in convenient valleys, but deliberately positioned on remote ridge tops and forested slopes, places that command a view of the world below. This choice of location transforms the logistical challenge into something extraordinary. The builders, likely small kin groups or clans, quarried local sandstone, then faced the task of moving these multi-ton blocks uphill across some of Europe's most rugged and broken terrain. Their solution was a brilliant collaboration with the seasons. While wooden sledges, rollers, and levers were certainly part of their toolkit, researchers believe they mastered the rhythm of the mountains themselves. During the long, harsh winters, they could have used the snow and ice to their advantage. A stone-laden sledge slides with far less friction over a packed, frozen path than over summer soil. They might have carefully guided their precious cargo down frozen stream beds or across iced-over meadows, using the natural downhill slopes whenever possible, even if it meant taking a longer, more circuitous route to ultimately reach a higher elevation. This was not a project of continuous, year-round labor, but a cyclical endeavor. Communities likely gathered during seasons of relative abundance, perhaps after harvests or during periods when hunting and herding demands were lower, to collectively undertake the sacred work of moving stone. The sheer number of these dolmens, scattered in their thousands across the mountains, suggests this was not the work of a centralized kingdom, but a shared cultural practice. Each capstone moved and placed was an act of profound devotion. These were not palaces for the living, but resting places for the departed, built to endure in locations that felt closer to the sky. The effort required to raise one in such a setting speaks to a deep-seated belief, a desire to anchor the memory of a loved one to a place of timeless beauty and permanence. The dolmens of the Caucasus are a powerful reminder that the principles of megalithic movement, leverage, lubrication, timing, and teamwork were not secrets held by a few advanced civilizations. They were a kind of universal engineering language, understood and adapted by communities everywhere, from isolated mountain clans to island settlers. They looked at their world, understood its materials and its rhythms, and then, with a shared vision and determined will, they moved mountains to honor those who came before, writing their respect into the very bones of the earth. Sometimes the greatest act of megalithic movement is not to bring a stone to a place, but to move the mountain itself. The 13th stone on our list is a negative space, the vast, empty niche carved into the sandstone cliffs of Bamiyan, Afghanistan. In the 6th century of the Common Era, Buddhist monks and artisans undertook a project of breathtaking inversion. They did not erect a statue. They carved away an entire cliffside to create a home for one, moving thousands of tons of stone not by dragging it across a plain, but by lowering it piece by piece from a dizzying height. The two great Buddhas, one standing 55 meters tall, were sculpted directly from the living rock. But to free these figures, workers first had to hollow out monumental alcoves around them, an engineering feat that rivals any transport operation. Using iron chisels, hammers, and wedges, teams perched on precarious wooden scaffolding anchored directly into the cliff face. Their task was one of meticulous subtraction. As they chiseled outward from the central form of the future Buddha, they dislodged massive blocks of sandstone. Each block, some weighing several tons, then had to be carefully managed. Workers likely used a system of ropes, hemp nets, and simple wooden cranes or windlasses to lower these stones in a controlled descent, down the sheer cliff to the valley floor hundreds of feet below. This was a constant ballet of balance and trust, where a single snapped rope could mean catastrophe. The removed stone was not wasted. It was repurposed to build the monastic complexes at the cliff's base and to construct the ramps and staircases that allowed access to the ever-growing niches. This project demonstrates a profound principle of ancient large-scale work, the division of a seemingly impossible task into countless, manageable increments. No single person moved a mountain, but a coordinated community, working over generations, moved a mountain's worth of stone. Each day's labor removed a few more cubic feet of rock. Each safely lowered block was a small victory, and each year brought the serene, colossal figure closer to emerging from its stony prison. The work was driven by a powerful devotional perseverance, a belief that making the divine visible in the landscape was worth a lifetime of patient, dangerous effort. The niches at Bamiyan are a different kind of monument. They speak not of a stone's journey across land, but of a community's journey through time, their collective will slowly, surely, carving a space for ore out of solid rock. They remind us that moving stone is not always about addition. It can also be about revelation, about the patient removal of everything that is not the sacred form waiting within. Scattered across the misty highlands of Laos, the 14th stone is not one object but thousands. The Plain of Jars is an archaeological dreamscape, a rolling plateau where enormous stone vessels, some taller than a person and weighing several tons, stand in silent congregations. Carved from local sandstone and conglomerate between 500 years before the Common Era and 500 after, these jars present a mystery of both purpose and logistics. How did their makers, living in these remote hills, transport such massive, carefully shaped containers from their quarries to sites spread over many kilometers of rugged terrain? The quarries were not far, perhaps only a few kilometers away, but in a landscape of steep slopes and dense vegetation, moving a multi-ton stone jar even 1 kilometer becomes a monumental puzzle. Researchers studying the site suggest a brilliantly adapted method, one that turned the local environment into a tool. The builders likely employed a system of bamboo rollers. Bamboo, abundant and incredibly strong, could have been laid in parallel tracks. Using ropes likely woven from jungle vines or plant fibers, large teams could have levered a jar onto this flexible yet sturdy track, then painstakingly rolled it forward, constantly repositioning the rollers from back to front. The hilly ground itself might have been used strategically, with teams carefully controlling the jar's descent down slopes, using ropes as brakes rather than fighting gravity to pull it uphill. Timing was also key. The work may have been scheduled for the wet season, when the tropical rains softened the earth. A waterlogged clay base could have allowed the jars to be slid or skidded with less friction, the mud acting as a natural lubricant that turned the difficult ground into a temporary aid. This was not haphazard dragging, but a seasonal, calculated operation. The profound question of why they undertook this effort brings us to the jar's likely purpose. Most archaeological evidence points to their use in funerary practices. They may have served as vessels for the departed, or as places for secondary burial rituals where remains were ceremonially placed inside. In this light, the immense labor of moving the stone transforms into something sacred. The physical journey of the jar from the quarry where it was born from the earth, across the landscape it would forever watch over, to its final station was likely a ritual procession. Each pull of the rope, each controlled slide down a muddy slope, was an act of communal participation in a cycle of memory and respect. The effort itself embedded the story of the community into the land, turning a simple act of transport into a permanent ceremony. The jars do not just sit on the plain, they belong to it. Their placement and their very presence a testament to a culture that believed honoring those who passed required the living to move mountains, or at least to move the stone that would hold their memory. The Maltese archipelago rises from the Mediterranean as a series of sun-bleached limestone plateaus. Here, the 15th stones on our list form not just a temple, but a celestial machine. The Mnajdra complex, constructed over 5,600 years ago, is a symphony in coralline limestone, its massive blocks fitted together with a precision that seems to defy its Stone Age origins. These builders worked without metal, their world defined by stone, wood, and fiber. Yet they moved 20-ton blocks from quarries perhaps a kilometer away and assembled them into chambers that perfectly align with the equinox sunrise, filtering beams of light into the deepest sanctuaries. How did an island community with limited resources achieve such exacting work? The answer may lie in a deceptively simple innovation found scattered around the site's spherical stone balls. These palm-sized spheres, carved from the same hard limestone, are not decorative. Archaeologists propose they were integral to the transport system, acting as the world's first ball bearings. Imagine a massive wooden sledge loaded with a temple block, resting not on fixed rollers but on a track lined with these stone spheres. As teams pulled with ropes, the spheres would rotate in their wooden grooves, drastically reducing friction and allowing the heavy load to move with a smoother, more controlled motion than simple rolling logs could provide. This was a leap in engineering thinking, a move from sliding to a form of rotational movement that presaged the wheel itself. It represents a profound understanding of physics born from necessity and careful observation. The entire endeavor, from quarrying to final placement, was an act of sacred geometry. Each stone moved was not merely construction material, it was a piece of a cosmological puzzle. The effort to shape it, to guide it across the island's rocky terrain using these ingenious bearings, and to set it in perfect alignment was a devotional act. The temple was not built after the community prospered. The communal labor of building it, of moving these mountains of stone together, is likely what forged and sustained the community itself. Mnajdra stands as a powerful reminder that innovation often flourishes in constraint. Isolated on their island, the Maltese builders looked at the spheres underfoot and saw not just stones but a way to move the world. They transformed the very land they walked upon into a mechanism for reaching toward the heavens, proving that spiritual vision and practical ingenuity are two sides of the same carefully fitted stone. At 12,600 feet, the very air itself becomes a challenge. On the high Andean plateau of Bolivia, the Tiwanaku culture built a city that seemed to defy the sky, and at its heart lies the 16th stone, the Gate of the Sun. This monumental arch, carved from a single block of andesite weighing 10 tons, is more than an entrance. It is a portal carved with a complex celestial calendar. Its journey to this breathtaking height is a story of endurance calibrated to the rhythm of the mountains. The stone was quarried from the shores of Lake Titicaca, over 10 kilometers away. While the Altiplano is relatively flat, the distance is deceptive. Every step was taken in an atmosphere with 40% less oxygen than at sea level, where physical exertion comes with a punishing tax on the human body. The builders, however, were masters of this environment. They adapted their methods to its stark logic. Using ropes woven from the hides of llamas, the region's only beast of burden, and sturdy wooden sledges, they would have mobilized large teams. The key was not speed, but sustainable, rhythmic effort. They likely moved in shifts, with fresh crews constantly rotating in to take up the pull, advancing the stone in a slow, ceremonial procession across the vast plain. This was not merely a transport operation, it was an act of pilgrimage, integrating the stone's physical journey into its ultimate spiritual purpose. The gate's intricate frieze, depicting a central deity surrounded by winged attendants and calendar symbols, was almost certainly planned before the stone ever left the quarry. This means the engineers were not just moving a block, they were moving a completed theological text, a sacred object that could not be damaged. Every precaution, every padded sledge and carefully chosen path was taken to protect the intricate carvings that held the community's understanding of time and the cosmos. The Gate of the Sun, therefore, represents a perfect fusion of environment, engineering, and belief. The thin air did not stop the vision, it refined the process, demanding a communal effort so profound that the act of moving the stone became a ritual of perseverance, a collective breath held across 10 kilometers of high desert, all to place a doorway to the heavens upon the roof of the world. Peat is a deceptive surface, soft and yielding underfoot yet capable of swallowing effort whole. On the windswept Isle of Lewis, the 17th stones on our list rise from this soggy ground in a silent, cross-shaped formation. The Callanish stones, erected around 4,900 years ago, are hewn from the oldest rock in Britain, a stark Lewisian gneiss that gleams with flecks of quartz under the northern light. The largest monolith towers over 4.5 meters, a several-ton sentinel that had to be guided across a landscape of bog, rock, and relentless wind. Their local origin did not make the task simple, it merely defined the terms of the challenge. In this environment, dragging a stone on a wooden sledge would risk it sinking into the soft, waterlogged peat, mirroring the effort in mud. The builders, attuned to every nuance of their world, likely turned the very seasons into their construction schedule. One compelling theory suggests they worked during the deep freeze of winter. When the bogs and logs hardened into sheets of ice, the treacherous peat would become a solid, slippery highway. A stone-laden sledge could glide across the frozen surface with a fraction of the effort required in summer, transforming an impassable swamp into a seasonal road of perfect efficiency. They may have also constructed raised wooden trackways, laying down a path of halved logs to create a stable, dry causeway through the mire, a temporary railroad of timber that allowed teams to pull their burdens toward the sacred ground. But the true purpose of this hardship is written in the stone's precise arrangement. The central circle and radiating avenues form a cruciform pattern that aligns with the complex cycles of the moon. Every 18.6 years, the moon skims low along the southern horizon, seeming to dance between the stones in a slow, celestial procession that would have been observed over generations. This means the movement of each stone was not a random act of labor. It was a directed, deliberate placement. The physical journey of the monolith from quarry to site was guided by an exact celestial map held in the minds of the builders. They were not just moving rock, they were anchoring astronomical knowledge into the earth, calibrating their effort to the slow turn of the heavens. In the harsh climate of the Outer Hebrides, survival demanded a deep collaboration with natural cycles. The builders of Carnac extended that collaboration into the realm of meaning. They used the winter's ice not just to survive but to build. They read the landscape not just for resources but for alignments. Their achievement shows how environmental constraints can become the mother of sacred ingenuity, proving that even in the softest ground, a community with a vision of the stars can raise stones that stand firm for millennia. The ocean floor holds its own silent arguments. Off the coast of Yonaguni Island, Japan, the 18th site on our list rests in a realm of perpetual twilight, a massive sandstone formation that has sparked one of archaeology's most enduring debates. Known as the Yonaguni Monument, its terraced walls, sharp angles, and seemingly perfect steps plunge down to depths of 25 meters. Marine geologist Masaki Kimura has long championed the idea that this is not a natural wonder, but a man-made or heavily modified structure, potentially over 10,000 years old. If he is correct, then this site redefines the very stage of megalithic ambition, moving the story from dry land into the domain of the sea. The transport puzzle here is inverted. If ancient builders did shape this monument, they were either working on dry land before rising sea levels claimed it, or they were operating in a shallow, coastal environment, perhaps even underwater. This introduces a radical variable into our understanding of prehistoric engineering. Proponents of the human-made theory suggest that to move and position such large sandstone blocks in a marine setting, these builders might have mastered primitive forms of hydroengineering. Imagine using buoyancy as a tool. They could have lashed air-filled animal skins or sealed, hollowed logs to the stones, creating makeshift pontoons. This would have dramatically reduced the effective weight of a block, allowing teams to guide it through the water with ropes from boats or from the shore, maneuvering it into place with a fluid grace impossible on land. The stone would have seemed almost to float into position, a dance with the water rather than a struggle against gravity. The mainstream scientific view, however, cautions that the formations are likely the result of natural sandstone fracturing, shaped by strong currents and tectonic activity over millennia. The debate itself is the point, whether entirely natural, enhanced by human hands, or wholly constructed. The Yonaguni Monument forces us to expand our imagination. It asks us to consider a possibility that the full scope of ancient stonework may be hidden beneath the waves, on continental shelves that were once dry, inhabited land. If our ancestors did work with submerged or soon-to-be submerged stones, they were engaging with a completely different set of physical laws, potentially developing a suite of techniques for which we have no surviving blueprint. This site, in its murky ambiguity, pushes the boundaries of the story. It suggests that the human drive to shape stone might have followed the retreating coastlines of a changing world, leaving clues in places we are only just beginning to look. The monument's greatest lesson may be one of humility, reminding us that the map of megalithic achievement is still being drawn, and its edges may lie where the land meets the sea and memory fades into myth. The value of a stone can be measured in more than weight. On the remote islands of Yap in Micronesia, the 19th stone on our list is not a monument or a marker, but money. The giant limestone discs known as rai are a form of currency unlike any other, their worth intrinsically linked to a perilous journey across the open sea. Quarried from limestone formations on the island of Palau, over 250 miles of ocean away, these stones represent a breathtaking fusion of maritime skill and economic ingenuity. The largest rai stones stand over 3 meters tall, weighing up to 4 tons, yet they were not meant to be carried in a pocket. They were meant to be remembered. Their creation was only the beginning. After being carefully shaped into a rough disc with a central hole, the real test commenced. Using bamboo rafts and large outrigger sailing canoes, the Yapese navigators would embark on a voyage of weeks across the unpredictable Pacific. The stone would be lashed to the side of a vessel or floated between 2 canoes, a delicate balancing act where a sudden storm could mean the loss of both the crew and their colossal cargo. This journey was the crucible that gave the stone its value. The difficulty of the transport, the number of lives risked, and the stories of the voyage became the very ledger of its worth. A stone that survived a harrowing storm was worth infinitely more than one brought over on calm seas. Once safely ashore on Yap, the final movement was almost ceremonial. Using wooden poles as rollers, the community would guide the rai stone inland to a village or a family compound, where it would be placed upright in a prominent location. It was not spent in the way we exchange coins. Its ownership might change hands during a major transaction like a wedding settlement or a political alliance, but the stone itself rarely moved again. Its physical journey was complete, but its social journey was just beginning. This system transformed the act of moving a megalith into the foundation of an economy. The stone was not valuable because of the limestone itself, which was abundant on other islands. Its value was the crystallized effort, the collective memory of the voyage etched not on its surface but in the minds of the entire community. The rai stone was a public ledger, a testament to human endeavor that everyone could see. It wove the movement of massive stones directly into the fabric of social trust and identity. To own a piece of that story was to own a share in the courage and skill of your ancestors. In this, the Yapese achieved something profound. They proved that the greatest weight a stone can carry is not tons, but meaning, and that the most powerful engine for moving it is not rope, but a shared story of risk and return written upon the waves. The final stone on our list is one that has already vanished. The Great Pyramid's true skin was not its rough, stepped core, but a breathtaking cloak of polished white. The 20th and final stones were the Tura limestone casing blocks, each weighing several tons, which once transformed the structure into a flawless geometric mountain, reflecting the desert sun like a colossal beacon. Their journey represents the absolute pinnacle of integrated ancient logistics, a process where every single movement was part of a grand, unbroken chain. These stones began their life in quarries on the Nile's east bank, directly across the river from the Giza Plateau. The distance was not vast, but the obstacle was elemental, a wide, powerful waterway. The Egyptians, masters of their environment, turned this obstacle into the central artery of their project. They quarried the fine white limestone with meticulous care, knowing these were the showpiece stones that would define the pyramid's eternal appearance. Once freed, each block faced a carefully choreographed sequence. During the annual inundation, when the Nile swelled beyond its banks, engineers guided the stones onto specially built barges. The flooded river brought the water's edge right to the base of the desert plateau, minimizing the overland haul. It was a brilliant act of synchronization, aligning the rhythm of construction with the heartbeat of the river itself. Upon landing, the stones were transferred onto wooden sledges. Here, the final, most iconic image of pyramid construction comes into focus: the massive ramps. While theories about the ramp structures vary, the principle is constant: a sloping highway of earth and brick that spiraled or zigzagged up the growing sides of the pyramid. Teams of laborers, likely working in coordinated shifts, would have dragged the sledge up this incline, a slow, grueling ascent against gravity. The surface of the ramp may have been lubricated with water or a slick clay mixture to reduce friction, a detail suggested by tomb paintings and confirmed by simple physics. But this was not a brute force haul. The casing stones required perfect preservation. Any significant chip or crack during transport would ruin their seamless fit and polished finish. This means every step, from the initial levering onto the barge to the final pull up the ramp, was executed with a focus on control and stability. The ropes were strong, the sledges robust, and the path as smooth as human ingenuity could make it. The ultimate goal was a joint so tight that a razor blade could not slip between the stones. This precision required that the transport process deliver each block not just to the site, but to its exact, predetermined place in the geometric puzzle, ready for the final craftsman to set it with absolute accuracy. What we see in this final, holistic operation is the complete synthesis of all the methods we have explored. It combines the water transport of the Olmec, the seasonal timing seen at Carnac, the sledge and lubricant technique of the obelisks, and the ramp engineering of Mycenaean. The Egyptians orchestrated these methods into a single, sustained symphony of movement that lasted for decades. They did not just move 20 stones, they moved millions, but each one followed a perfected protocol. This final layer of work shows that the greatest megalithic achievements were not about one secret technique, but about the seamless integration of many. It was about seeing the entire landscape, from distant quarry to soaring summit, as a single machine to be understood and mastered. The vanished casing stones leave us with a powerful closing thought, that the apex of ancient engineering was not a mystery of magic, but a masterpiece of management, turning thousands of individual journeys into one immortal whole. 20 journeys, one profound truth. While the stones themselves are scattered across the globe, the methods used to move them converge on a universal human toolkit. It is a pattern that reveals not a single lost secret, but a shared grammar of ingenuity, spoken in the language of physics and community. From the frosty plains of Carnac to the muddy riverbanks of the Olmec world, ancient builders repeatedly turned to the same elegant solutions. They became masters of friction management, placing their stones on wooden sledges that glided over tracks of greased logs or polished stone rollers. They understood the power of lubrication, using water on sand in Egypt, wet clay in Lebanon, or even mashed sweet potato on Rapa Nui to create a slippery highway. They harnessed the landscape itself, floating stones on rivers, sliding them across winter ice, and using gentle slopes to let gravity assist their efforts. And for the final, delicate act of raising, they universally relied on the simple genius of the lever and the earth ramp, turning incremental force into monumental height. These were not advanced technologies in the modern sense. They were brilliant applications of observed principles, a testament to a deep, practical intelligence that studied the world and learned how to work with it. The true common thread, however, is not found in wood or rope but in people. Every one of these achievements was powered by coordinated human effort. The image that emerges is not of slaves driven by a whip, but of communities united by a purpose. Whether it was seasonal gatherings at Göbekli Tepe, clan-based efforts in the Caucasus, or a society-wide mobilization for a pharaoh's pyramid, the labor was communal. This work required planners to design the route, rope makers to weave the cables, cooks to feed the crews, and leaders to synchronize the rhythmic pull of hundreds. It was a social symphony where every role was essential to the final chord. Underpinning all this physical and social effort was a motivation powerful enough to justify generations of toil. The stones were never moved for mere utility. They were moved for meaning. They were acts of devotion connecting the community to the gods, the cosmos, or the ancestors. They were declarations of power, cementing a ruler's authority in the immovable weight of rock. They were vessels for memory, ensuring a legacy would outlast flesh and bone. In many cases, the process of moving the stone was itself a sacred ritual, a ceremonial procession that imbued the material with spiritual significance long before it reached its final destination. The journey was the prayer. This synthesis does not diminish the wonder of these sites, it deepens it. It replaces the vague notion of alien help or lost super science with something far more resonant, the documented brilliance of human collaboration. It shows us that our ancestors looked at a 50-ton block and did not see an impossibility. They saw a problem to be solved together, a challenge that would bind their community and express their deepest beliefs. They worked with the grain of their world, using observation, patience, and shared will to achieve what seems, from our mechanized perspective, miraculous. Their legacy is not a mystery of how, but a testament to why, when a culture's vision is clear and its people are united, they can truly move the earth. The silent megaliths standing across our planet are more than ancient ruins. They are testaments to human collaboration, creativity, and perseverance in the face of staggering physical challenges. From the rolling hills of England to the remote islands of the Pacific, our ancestors moved mountains of stone without wheels or beasts of burden. They used only their wits, their strength, and their unwavering collective will. This shared story, written in granite and limestone, tells us something fundamental about who we are. It reveals a common thread of ingenuity that connects cultures separated by vast oceans and thousands of years. They all looked at an impossible task and saw not a barrier but a challenge to be met together. The 20 stones we have explored are not isolated mysteries. They are chapters in a single, global narrative of human ambition. They remind us that history is not just written in fragile texts on parchment or clay. It is etched permanently into the very landscape by hands long gone, a library of achievement built from the earth itself. Each stone is a frozen moment of triumph, a snapshot of a community's greatest effort made solid. As we continue to uncover their secrets with new tools and fresh perspectives, we are not merely learning about forgotten techniques. We are ultimately learning about ourselves, about our enduring capacity to imagine a future, to organize around a shared vision, and to build wonders that outlast centuries. These monuments ask us to look beyond the stone to the people, to hear in their silence the echo of coordinated effort, of rhythmic chants, of generations united by a purpose greater than any single life. They stand as a quiet promise that when we work together with observation, patience, and shared will, we can move more than stone. We can move the course of history. If you found this journey into the past fascinating, consider subscribing for more deep dives into history's greatest mysteries. We would love to hear your thoughts as well. Which of these megalithic feats amazes you the most? Share your choice in the comments below.